Hi Booktube, and welcome to another video. This is a tag video. This is the 2018 Postscript tag, which was originated by Adam at Memento Mori. I wasn't tagged, but I quite fancy it because I think it's quite a clever tag in that it allows you to review your year of reading in some ways without it compromising the top 10 reads or whatever that most of us are going to be doing. And in fact, I'm going to be recording mine tomorrow. So, the first prompt: the longest book you've read this year and the book that took you the longest to finish. Well, the longest book I read this year was non-fiction. It was called Good Night and Good Riddance by David Kavanagh, which was a biography of the BBC radio DJ John Peel, who lasted from 1967 to about 2005, his death then. I say lasted because he was a radio DJ who not only survived the different changes in music trends over that period, but was ahead of the curve virtually every decade. And that was 630 pages or there or thereabouts, and was the soundtrack to my life. I ought to say that most of the books I'm going to mention, if I've got a dedicated video to them, I will post that in the description box below. In terms of fiction, the longest book I read this year was this, Sergio de la Pava, The Lost Empress, which clocks in at also 630 pages. So in fact, I didn't need to make a distinction between the two of them, and I've got a review on that. The book that took you the longest to finish. Okay. Now, this isn't sort of scientifically proven because Goodreads, probably Goodreads does record this in terms of date began and date finished, but I'm not referring to Goodreads. This is just my emotional response to this question. So, Jarett Kobek was an author I read more of than anyone else. I read 3 of his books this year. One of them makes it into my top 10. The other makes it into my worst reads of the year, and that's the one I want to talk about in terms of taking me the longest time to finish. It's called The Future Won't Be Long. And I actually made a video, before I bought the book, I actually made a video on BookTube asking readers whether I thought I should actually take the plunge and buy it, because it was about a theme I have absolutely no interest in, which is the New York clubbing scene, the club kids of the 80s and 90s New York. And I said, well, I love Kobek, so, is he such a good writer that he can make this theme work for me, even though I have no interest in it? Or should I not risk tarnishing his esteem in my eyes and just not read it? In the end, I took the plunge and I bought it when it came out in paperback. And I took it with me on the Eurostar because I was doing an event in Paris. So I took it to read on the 3.5-hour journey there and the 3.5-hour journey back. And it was a slog. And because I was on the Eurostar, I hadn't brought anything else to read, so I was stuck with it. So I managed to get most of it read. I can't remember how many pages it was, 400 maybe. So I managed to get 300 pages of it read on those 2 journeys. But the last 100 pages, once I was home, I could not bring myself to read. Then I was reading I started reading other books and finishing them before. I did eventually finish it, just because I don't really bail on books. Sorry, Sean the Book Maniac. So I don't know exactly how long it took me. Probably about 2 or 3 weeks. But I'd read 3/4 of it. And it was only the last quarter that took me all that extra time. A book you read in 2018 that was outside of your comfort zone. Well, I don't really have a concept of consciously reading out of my comfort zone. I read books that I think are going to interest me. Having said that, though, there were several types of books that put me into discomfort or were a new experience for me. So, for example, I read a book called Raising Sparks by Ariel Kahn, who was one of my fellow shortlisted Not the Booker Prize nominees. And as I read it, or after I read it, I discovered it was being touted as an example of uplit, as in uplifting literature, which is not a concept I'd come across before. So that was my immersion in that. Now, if something is described as uplit, I keep wanting to say uplit, it wouldn't make me want to go and buy it, because I I don't see it as a useful. Well, I don't see any genre label as terribly useful, but you know, it seems to be another sort of marketing category which has nothing to do with the merits of any book. So that was kind of a weird thing to be exposed to. Another book which I recently read and done a a dedicated video to, called The History of Violence by Edward Louise. I was put in an uncomfortable position with this, not because of the subject matter, which is, can be, trigger warning territory, in that it's about a male-on-male rape. So it wasn't the subject matter that upset me. It was the position I found myself as the reader that I felt the writing had manoeuvred me into, where I would, this is strongly autobiographical, and yet the way it was written, it just wasn't credible. And I felt very, very uneasy about being put in that position by the author, because it makes me sort of deny a very real experience of his. I mean, I know this is fiction, I know he's fictionalised it, he's worked the material, but it was more than that. It was me being incredulous that this had actually happened to him, and I just felt very uncomfortable with that. Another book that was slightly strange experience was Jeff Vandermeer, Annihilation, which again I got a dedicated video to, and that was uncomfortable because I'd seen the film first. And as regular viewers know, I don't like watching movies of books that have been adapted from books. But the only reason I thought I would go and read the book afterwards was because the book chemist did a review of it, where he talked about it in terms of its being metafictional, and I was quite interested to see that, because you couldn't get that sense from the film. And the whole thing was a very disappointing experience. The read was disappointing. The film was beautiful, but ultimately vapid, I thought. Anyway, go and check out my review of that. In terms of, I mean, it is just that thing of picking up a book after seeing the film, and the film wasn't even that good. So all in all, just not a great experience. And the last thing, I suppose, this, I picked a book up in a it was non-fiction in a genre I haven't read for a long time, which was philosophy, where I'd been recommended by Neil Griffiths. Galen Strawson's Things That Bother Me. It's not really discomfort, and it was a great read. It was a 5-star read, and again I've got a dedicated review on it. So technically I wasn't discomforted, but I was reading something I haven't read for a long time. I did all my philosophy reading in my 20s, so a good 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. Okay, prompt 3. How many books did you reread in 2018? Well, I reread 3, and none of which were sort of deliberate decisions on my part. So the first one I read was A Kestrel for a Knave by Barry Hines, and I reread that because I was writing a blog post for a website I occasionally contribute to, where they were celebrating the 40 years since 50 years, since 1968, the year of sort of revolutionary politics. And I wanted to look back at a book that had been published in that year, and that was the book. So I did it with a specific purpose in mind. The second book I reread was William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury, which I reread because my son was studying it in his American Studies degree at university, and he couldn't get to grips with it at all. He couldn't get past Benji's chapter. And so I said I'd read it again and help him out. So I did that. And then the third reread was a book called Alphabet City by Stephen Knight, which I reread because I was doing 6 booktube videos on 6 degrees of book separation, and that was one of the ones in the chain, and I'll post the link to that video of the 6 degrees of book separation. Now, Stephen Knight, if you don't know, is, started life as an author, I guess in the 80s when that book was published, or early 90s. But he's left fiction behind because he's gone on to be a hugely successful TV and film person. So he is credited with coming up with the concept of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. He also has made films. I can't reel any of them off the top of my head because I'm not a great cinema goer, but he's also done British TV dramas such as Peaky Blinders, which is a sort of huge cult hit over here. So that was Stephen Knight, and Alphabet City was very good. And it's a loss to fiction that he's gone on to make serious money in other art forms. So question 4, favourite reread of 2018? Well, of the 3 books I reread, The Sound of the Fury just, reaffirms my faith in Faulkner as a sort of genius, modernist writer. I mean, what he does with language and perspective in that book, particularly Benji and Quentin's perspectives, are superb. And Alphabet City, just because it's such a clever, fiendishly clever little book. Prompt 5, a book you read for the first time in 2018 that you look forward to rereading in the future. Well, as I said, I don't really reread books, but one I think I might, for a couple of reasons, is Jarett Kobek. Yes, he of the Worst Read of the Year, and this is the one of mine, spoiler alert, that will creep into my top 10 books of the year. It's called I Hate the Internet. It's the first book I read in 2018, and when I finished reading it, I thought, that's not going to be beaten. Now, you have to tune in and see whether, in fact, it is beaten, but it's a brilliant, scurrilous, scabrous sort of book about our social media lives and existing on social media. It's very, very funny. It's very, very acute and intuitive about the secret agendas that we are unaware of when we're online, The problem now, one of the reasons I want to reread it is because it'd be worth it 10 years seeing if the analysis still holds up. Are we still living lives like that? Of course, social media might mutate into something wholly different. But it'd be interesting to see that. And would he come over as such a sort of sharp cultural commentator? But the other reason I want to reread it is because that was the book that led me into the book that I so dislike called The Future Won't Be Long, of his, that I talked about that took me the longest to finish. Sorry, question 1. And the reason for that is because the 2 main characters of I Hate the Internet get their own book in The Future Won't Be Long. But the point about Kobek is I Hate the Internet is not about characters and plot. It's about his social commentary and his social sort of satire. And then to sort of write a sort of half-serious novel of plot and characters in The Future Won't Be Long just didn't work. And I can't see... If I go back in 10 years and read I Hate the Internet, I can't imagine that I'd be any more sort of impressed with the characters that are in there. But by then I would have read other Kobek books. For example, there's one coming out next year called Only Americans Will Burn in Hell, which is a great title. Has he shown himself to be a sort of more all-round author who can write characters and plot, or is he only really this social satirist? So I think those are the 2 reasons that I'd be quite interested in maybe reading him sort of 10 years down the line. Question 6. Favourite single short story or novella that you read in 2018? Well, novella was A Cemetery in Barnes by Gabriel Josipovici, which I've got a review of and made the shortlist of the Goldsmith Prize. In terms of short story, I've had a really bad year with short story collections. I read one very early on, and I made a dedicated video on it around Carmen Maria Machado's Her Body and Other Parties, which had 2 brilliant stories, had 2 or 3 so-so stories, and then 2 or 3 terrible stories. And my video looks at, well, what does it take to make a good short story collection? How do you decide the running order of the stories, because that can so influence your reading pleasure and your experience of reading the book. And for a good 6 months, I didn't pick up another book of short stories because I was after making that video, and her collection wasn't that bad. I'd say there were 2 brilliant stories in it. The first story is fantastic, but I was just off short stories. I'm currently, my bath time reading is a book of short stories by Jeffrey Eugenides. Now, I love Jeffrey Eugenides' novels, but this book of short stories so far is pretty lamentable. I'm about 3/5 of the way through, and there's only been one story I've liked. So, I've ended the year on my thoughts about short stories and the way I started it. So I think I've read about 5 or 6 collections of short stories this year. But one of them was written by Ben Marcus, who's my favourite living author. I'm slightly disappointed that this is his 2nd successive collection of short stories. I wanted to get back to writing novels, because that's why I really sort of venerate in him. But there was one, I mean, it's a pretty good, you know, of the short story collections, it's head and shoulders the best I've read this year. And again, I've got a dedicated review of it. I'll link to that. But there's one story in particular called Blueprint for St. Louis in it, which is stunningly, it's horrible. In a similar vein to Kobek, I suppose, but much more literary in that it shows us where we are in the early 21st century emotionally. So the premise of it is that America is beset by terrorist atrocities and bombings in public spaces. And as part of this, a industry has grown up in designing and building memorials to people who've died in terrorist atrocities. And it looks at a husband and wife team who own just such a company, and they are tendering for the latest memorial to be erected in St. Louis. And it's about that and sort of space, architecture, absence, presence, public space. It's about that, but there's just one bit in it where they go, so the last bit to be negotiated is with the pharmaceutical companies, because every memorial now has to have a chemical spray on its visitors to exactly prompt the emotional response in them. You know, not too over the top, and yet, you know, significantly sort of mournful and chastened and all that sort of stuff. And just that concept that we are so alienated from our own emotions that it has to be prompted by a spray, I just thought is genius. It's a wonderful story, and his collection is called Notes from the Fog. Prompt 7, Mass Appeal, a book you liked and would recommend to a wide variety of readers. And this links into prompt 8, which I will read now as well, and I'll sort of try and answer them both together. 8, Specialised Appeal, a book you liked but would be hesitant to recommend to just anyone. Well, my top 10 books of the year will reveal that all 10 of those books, I'm hesitant to recommend them. Because while they were all 5-star reads for me, I give 5-star reads when there's something particularly mind-blowing in a book. It doesn't have to be the perfect book or, you know, from beginning to end, it's fantastic. It can just be something so utterly brilliant that I can award it 5 stars. Or, as is perhaps more common than that in the top 10 that I will pick, is that there's stuff that I think is of, you know, you need to have particular taste in it. You know, so for example, I'm not going to give any of the top 10 away. I've already said that Jarett Kobek's I Hate the Internet is in there. For me, it was funny, it was socially biting, it could be seen as offensive, all of which I liked and led to me giving it 5 stars. But it's not going to be to everyone's taste. Also, the fact I said it's not really a novel. You know, it is a lot of sort of him sort of giving sideways acerbic views on the things we do, dressed up as a novel, but it's not a novel really. And when he tries to write a novel in The Future Won't Be Long, it fails miserably. But not everyone's going to respond to that. They go, oh, well, this isn't a novel. I'm not enjoying this because the plot and characters don't hold up. So there is quite a lot of that. Well, I say a lot of it. All 10 of my books, favourite books of the year, have one or other, or even a combination of both, as to why I couldn't wholeheartedly 100% say, you've got to read this, you've got to read this. You know, I have to leave it to people's judgment. Is it going to be enough? Is it not going to be so sort of reified or specialised or quirky, you know, for them to want to pick it up and read it? And I can't make that judgment for people. They have to, you know, make their own. Which comes back to the question of mass appeal. Well, I don't read mass appeal books. I would have said Milkman for this, but because it's won the Booker, it's kind of going to pick up mass appeal. And whether people like it, having read it or not, remains to be seen. A lot of people complain that it was too difficult and challenging, which I don't see, but I can understand why people say that. So the book I've actually gone for as to recommend as a mass appeal is Tell Them of Battles, Kings and Elephants by Matthias Enard, which is a beauty, you know, it's a small book, 120 pages, something like that, 130 pages. Now, Enard has written big tomes, Compass and Zone, which are all sort of about historical, you know, vast sweeps of history on the continent of Europe. And this takes a historical period of East meets West, of Constantinople and sort of the Ottoman Empire meeting Europe. but it's so light touch compared to those others. This is this is fantastic storytelling. This is a master in control. I mean, I think he's a fantastic writer anyway, but this has shown me another side to him, because this is light touch and yet still in total control. And there's a voice in it which is just so seductive, which I'm sure is in his other books, but so buried in amongst 500 pages. Whereas here, it's absolutely clear. So, I think Matthias Enard should be much more widely read anyway. I think he's one of the representatives of the French Renaissance in novels that I currently believe we are experiencing. So I want more people to read him anyway. But this is a good way into him, because I think it's very, very accessible. Will he be a mass appeal writer? No. But by my scale of things, he should be. Okay, 9. Reflect on your year as a bookish content creator. Goals met, good bad memories, favourite videos you made, etc. Reading classics, style of channel, haul stroke wrap-ups, updated bookshelf tour. No, I think that's somebody. I think I've cut and pasted that from Memento Mori's. No, because he didn't actually put anything he didn't put the questions in the description, for which thank you, Adam. So I got this off somebody else. So let's read the question again, because I made a right mess up of this. Reflect on your year as a bookish content creator. Goals met, good bad memories, favourite videos you made, etc. Well, I don't set myself goals. I have a career as a writer, so this is a sort of a side hobby, really. I treat it seriously, and it allows me to discourse and dialogue about books and reflect on them as a writer. I don't have a goal to it, after a certain number of subscribers or whatever. Having said that, the two most, which are my most pleasing videos, well, by a sort of a metric of views, I suppose. One I did on how do you solve a problem like Will's Self, which looks at his, writing oeuvre, but mainly concentrating on his book Phone, which I read this year. That's had 2,500 views, which you consider my average one gets about, anywhere between 50 and 150. So, sort of blown it out of the water. And then the other is Milkman by Anna Burns, which was sort of a quirk of luck, really, because I happened to finish reading it the week before the Booker Prize was announced, the winner. So that when she won, I must have just come up as a recent, when people were searching, Anna Burns Milkman. My review just must have been at near the top for whatever reason, and I've had about 2,000 views of that, which is very gratifying. In terms of content that I've been proud of, I did one called Writing Letters to Dead Authors, which just sort of explored my relationship to authors who've passed. I also did one on suicide authors who committed suicide. And one of my subscribers, I think might have been Peg the Book Prize Addict, although it might not have been Peg, I can't remember, actually requested the script that I wrote and read for that video on writing letters, which I thought was rather nice. As for creative content by others, well, there were two, really. There was Sean the Book Maniac, who coordinated and originated a campaign to celebrate Eric Carl Anderson, Lonesome Reader, his 40th birthday. So he got us all to do a happy 40th birthday tag for Eric, and that was A, great to do, B, great to watch everyone else's, and C, just really nice to sort of offer Eric. And Sean the Book Maniac is the most creative booktube content creator that I've come across. Some of his ideas are just fantastic, and everyone should subscribe to him. But the other one, in terms of an individual video, this is undoubtedly the most genius thing I've ever seen on BookTube. It's by Snow White Reader, and it's her Jane Austen v Charlotte Bronte rap battle. And that's what it is. It's a costume rap battle in which Snow White Reader dons the role of Jane Austen. Now, I assume she does Charlotte Bronte, but it could be a friend of hers for all I know. And they're back and forward at each other in rap style verse. It's just genius. And I actually shared it with my sons, one of who does rap battles, but he's not a reader, and the other one is a reader, but he would never read Jane Austen or Charlotte Bronte. I'm just so taken with it. So, you know, I bow down to you, Snow White reader, because I can't see that video ever being topped. And prop 10, thanks and fellow booktube creators. Well, I'm late to the party on this, as I say I wasn't tagged, for which I'm not resentful. So I think most of the people I follow have already done it. So I'm just going to throw it up to anyone who sees this who happens not to have done it. And there you have it. That was my booktube Postscript 2018 video. Thanks very much. Till next time.